Akash Inti, the real reflection of you. Just finished up some yoga, and funny enough, I don't know if it's funny, but I was on Photoshop earlier today. It's been forever since I've been on Photoshop. The funny thing is I bought a subscription of Photoshop April 2020 with the thought of oh yeah, I'm gonna use Photoshop a lot this year. Not really knowing what I would what 2020 held at that point. I mean, obviously pandemic was happening, but I don't know, I just wasn't sure. But the reason why I'm talking about this is because back in college, I remember my favorite college class that was kind of outside of my major was a digital media class that I took. And it was my arts requirement, and I was like, oh, okay, well, whatever. I'm just gonna take this digital media class. Digital media being everything we use, like Photoshop. I mean, that's pretty much what we really used in that class. Was just it was just Photoshop. It was an art class, digital media class. And anyways, that was probably, if I really look back at it, one of my favorite classes in college. Now at the time, I didn't really know what I was gonna do with it. And when I was graduating college, I'm like, oh, when am I ever going to use Photoshop again? And anyways, I ended up, long story, fast forward a little bit, I bought a subscription for Photoshop for about a year, didn't use it all too much, and then I've had some client work that has given me the opportunity to use Photoshop again and to just tap into it. And don't get me wrong, I'm pretty rusty with it, and luckily the client work itself was pretty easy to do. It wasn't anything all too demanding as it related to Photoshop, but it got me back in it. It got me back playing with that tool. And man, it's funny how important it is. I remember when I was just logging into it and playing around, obviously it took me a little while to get back into it and really understand where's all the different tools. How do I select this? How do I make a rectangle? And if you're a digital designer, if you're a graphic designer or something like that, and you're like, dude, really? But you also get it too, because it's for anyone, right? It's like when you've been away from your tools for a bit of time and you come back to them, well, there's a little bit of a learning curve, to say the least. But I loved it. It was fun, it's a beautiful way to play, right? One of the things that I learned in that class, now that I think back to it, and shout out to James Huckenpahler, who was my professor of digital media. He was at the Corcoran School of Art and Design. But one of the things that I learned from him, aside from what he encouraged us to do, which was to make things, was to find ways to break your tools. And I think this really applied to digital media specifically, right? The ideas of how do you break Photoshop? What can you do to break it, right? And it's not all right, we're here to destroy the tool itself and go into the back end code and really screw it up, but perhaps there's something there. That the idea really being is just finding the limitations, finding the edges, the limits of the tools themselves. And one of the things he encouraged us to do was to just to discover that and to really find that and see what happened, and explore that, right? I think his whole concept in that specific teaching, that specific class, was it's only at the edge of the limits of what you can do with your tools that you really get a finer understanding of what can you really create, right? One of the things that I took away from that assignment specifically was it got me thinking outside the box a little bit of how do I use this thing for what whomever the developer wanted me to use it, but how can I repurpose this same tool for something that the developer didn't even think about, right? I think that was the whole thing, and we can do that in all things in our life. I remember that class specifically, and kind of what I took away from it was okay, well, how does this apply to my regular life, right? What can I do with this in my life? And then it got me thinking about, well, what are the tools that I use in my life, and what are the purposes that I use them for, right? Oftentimes, designers, this could be designers of any kind. It could be a clothing designer, it could be an interior designer, it could be any type of designer. They create things with the stated purpose of, okay, this is the purpose for it. Now there's other types of designers that really just create it for, maybe the purpose is even aesthetics, right? The purpose could be for efficiency. The purpose could be anything in between. And so how to repurpose things that were initially designed for one specific thing, right? So if something was designed for simply aesthetics, only aesthetics, well, how can you repurpose that to make it potentially useful? I don't know, right? And I can't give you a concrete example right now because, I mean, I don't know. Maybe this yoga mat, right? I'm sitting on the yoga mat. I was just talking about this earlier. Well, how could I repurpose this yoga mat? Well, I could sleep on it if I really needed to, and I've done that before. What else could I repurpose this yoga mat for? Well, if I needed to, it absorbs water pretty well, so I could use it almost as kind of like a sponge. It might be a little gross afterwards, but could do that, and I don't know how much water it would take up, but that's one thing I could use it for. What else could I use this yoga mat for? Well, it's rubber. Maybe if I'm working with like something electrical, I can stand on this so it grounds me. So the idea being, how can I repurpose the tools that are around me and use them in ways that are innovative and creative? And that's being resourceful, and that's the essence of resourcefulness as I'm talking to you right now, and I'm thinking through that, I'm recognizing them. And that's awesome. You know, it's tapping into that resourcefulness, tapping into that creativity. That's really, really, wow, you can be so much more productive. And I'm thinking of a reading. I'm just finishing my way through Principles by Ray Dalio. Shout out to Ray Dalio. I bought this book when it came out. I think it was 2017, 2018. And it's a thick book, right? It's like 500, 600 pages. And I've had periods of time where I'm like really in it and I'm like going through the thick of it, and then there's other periods of time where I don't touch it for months on end. And so I'm finishing my first read through of the text itself, and I'm looking at it right now as I'm talking to you, and it's something that I really I'm grateful for, that resource existing and being there, right? To be able to tap into the mind of the top hedge fund manager in the world for over 25 years. That's incredible. And so all to say, why was I talking about Dalio? Well, he talks about how human productivity is the single most, I can't find the word right now. It's like a game changer, right? In other words, like it changes human civilization fundamentally at its core, and brings it up a whole new level. And so he talks about creativity. There's a couple other things that he talked about, but creativity, wisdom, and one more thing. But it's coming back to that was it was a reading that I had earlier today and was relating to right now. And now I found myself jumbling over my words and not really even know if my words are making sense at this particular moment in time, but that's okay. Well, that's what I got for today. Keep up, thrive, stay sexy.